There's a new minimalist show at the Art Institute, but nobody knows about it. We're not supposed to know about it because it's minimal. Tiny, tiny objects on plates. The show has no name and the works have no titles. If you ask where the show is, no one can tell you because it's minimal. In fact, the very premise of the show being in a museum is counter to the concept of minimalism. When Anne Goldstein came to the Art Institute a few years ago, I was very excited. Anne Goldstein is an expert in minimalistic art, and I was excited about all the conversations we weren't going to have about it. Art is often about how you frame it, but minimalism, well, there's no frame, no title, and no conversation. At best, it's just a bunch of small talk. Welcome to Sunday Coffee Hour. I'm Stanley Smith. At Sunday Coffee Hour, we talk about everything and nothing. This Sunday, we talked about setting the atmosphere on fire, being not offended, single factor analysis, and Senator Tommy Tupperville. The readings at Washington National Cathedral were from Isaiah. Everything that falls to the earth, the rain and the snow, must accomplish that which I purpose before it can return to the heavens. And from Romans, why just be yourself when you can be yourself and live in the Spirit? It's like having your cake and eating it too. The gospel reading was from Matthew. No one sows the seeds in the thorny briar patch or on the rocky ground, but God does because he's God. The sermon at Washington National Cathedral was from Patrick Kaiser. He preached about being a lifelong student. Being a student means following the teacher around and going around to see things from his perspective. Sometimes it means going to strange places or being planted in the thorny briar patch or on the rocky ground. Stepping into the atmosphere of your teacher provides the opportunity to understand the lesson that's there to be learned. There's nothing intermittent about learning because it's a lifelong process. At St. James Cathedral, the sermon was by Timothy Beltran del Rio. Timothy is entering theological study in Texas this fall. Timothy said he was raised by a fundamentalist family, and he attended a small fundamentalist college just a couple of blocks away from St. James. Timothy said in his life he's had many small emotional epiphanies. The small fundamentalist college Tim was referring to was, of course, the Moody Bible Institute. I've employed students from the Moody Bible Institute over the years and had clients who did the same. They were all lovely, lovely people. And I've been saved over and over again in the process. My Moody Bible students, they did warn me that the church I was a member of was a cult. And that did kind of turn out to be true. Anyway, I'm glad Tim found his way to St. James because the preaching there is excellent and it will serve him well as a good example to follow. At St. James, I did sometimes feel that Dean Barrington was screaming at me from the pulpit, but I've been screamed at by more threatening people than Mr. Barrington. I don't give advice, but I heard Peter Gomes preach once, and he said you should read the text, depart from the text, and never return to the text. And I did offer that axiom of advice to Tim. I appreciate that Tim lifted up what I heard as a key phrase in the reading this Sunday, that which I purpose, because it's God who purposes, not us. Could Tim have included in his sermon a story about the summer vacation of his youth and the full service gas station that Lisa did last summer? I guess not, because there were probably no full service gas stations in Tim's youth. Could he have ended his sermon like Pastor Chris did last week about how the sweet song of rest is still music to his ears? Perhaps. I hope that Tim's time at St. James will be remembered by him well, and it will be like music to his ears for many years to come. St. James is such an unattractive place, but it's been my observation that often the most attractive places are inhabited by the most unattractive people. So I give St. James high marks in the attractive people's department, and they're not even trying. In the Middle Ages, they thought the human body was made up of black and white bile. Today, science says we're a blob of bacteria given form by DNA and genetics. Religion traditionally has completed this formula by emphasizing that we're animated by the Spirit of God. We're not animated by a social justice program, having the right politics, or by an increasingly narrow set of very rigid beliefs. I don't come to church to hear about Jesus. I come to church to hear about God. At St. James, when they talk about Jesus and Christ, I hear God. At National Cathedral, when they talk about Jesus and Christ, I hear God. At Fourth Pres, when they talk about Christ, I hear social justice program. And until recently, when I heard Jesus, I heard country Western singer. We all need to find what we need to find, and we all need to move on and be where we need to be. We all want to be thrilled to be here, picking ourselves up from the thorny briar patch and moving to the fertile soil. That sounds really good. But is that the point? Maybe. But is that the mission of God's work, to be in the good place? At Central Pres in Atlanta, they have a good thing going, a new dynamic and energetic pastor who walked right in and stepped right into the frame perfectly. I can see how any search committee would think, wow, this is a winner. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, at Fourth Pres, there is much consternation. They will be wrestling with the collateral damage for a long, long time. Lots of hand wringing and self-flagellation going on. I had a friend who was a Fourth member, and she always said whenever the going got rough at Fourth, they just retreated back into the castle and pulled up the drawbridge. We all like to think that we're just, we've just been an observer in all this, not so much an active participant. I've done lots of observing, and I've witnessed some really terrific examples, along with some really bad behavior. I've personally witnessed people being mistreated, marginalized, unheard, and hurt, and dismissed at church. I like to think I was just an observer and not really taking any of it to heart, but there has been collateral damage, apparently. It's the post-traumatic stress disorder of going to church for myself and for many, many others. Many of us were just told that our concerns were just because we had other things going on, other issues in our lives. Duh. That's the reason most of us come to church in the first place, to find some kind of solace and assurance for everything that's going on in our lives. Brene Brown says our biggest fear in life is rejection. If anyone says anything that isn't nice, well, then it's all over. And even the conversation we weren't having comes to an abrupt end. It's all part of the cycle and culture of abuse. Abuse almost always occurs whenever there's a power imbalance. And the mechanism is most often about power, money, and control. They say that the house falls and the tenant lives on. But in this sad story, the catalyst for abuse is gone, and the culture for abuse and control lives on. When the Chicago Presbytery had their sex scandal a number of years ago, they had to sell the property, the camp property in Michigan, to pay off the settlement. New rules were put into place to safeguard future exposure and to protect the children. After the settlement, I asked if the safeguards which were put in place, was that so much to safeguard children or to protect the presbytery from future liability? Apparently that was a rhetorical question because no one answered the question. Eckhart Tolle says in our psyche, there's a lot of background unhappiness going on. Evelyn Woe said you spend the second year at college trying to get rid of the friends you had in your first year. We all make mistakes and suffer the consequences. We're all students, and learning is a lifelong process. Vicki Curtis gave a sermon once about the difference between being nice and being kind. They say that freedom is based on civility and being kind. Being kind is sometimes about asking those difficult questions. Marie Antoinette is a malign character from history because she seemed to be divorced from reality. But why can't we have our cake and eat it too? Why can't we be nice and kind and be able to have a real conversation without the fear of being rejected? I'm guilty of bad behavior. I can admit that. But what about people who can't? It's not a level playing field. We're not here to suffer for those who can't admit their blame because that's plying on the forgiveness that God alone has granted. Stepping into that space makes you the ultimate grifter. There's no honesty and no humility in that. It's anathema. In the F. Scott Fitzgerald novel, The Great Gatsby, one of the characters says he senses that God is always watching. Then his wife points out that that's an image from a nearby optometrist's billboard. She says, "You're so dumb, you don't even know you're alive." I I might be a dumb person, but I know I'm alive, and I've been following the teacher around for a little while now. Over the years, when I've shared my church stories with friends, they inevitably ask, "How how can you go to that place?" And I say, "Well, it's because I just have to see how it all turns out." Well, we've all seen how it turned out. It was a dramatic buildup to a tragic end. In The Great Gatsby, in the end, we see the congregation floating face down in the swimming pool, while the perpetrator of the crime goes skippity doo dah into the next chapter in her life to Atlanta. If you would like to join us at Sunday Coffee Hour is every Sunday at 12 noon Central Time on Zoom. I will include my email in the description of this video. I'll be happy to send you an invitation. And I look forward to seeing you very, very soon.